Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. We have Ken Quiethawk to thank for that lovely introduction, and you can find him on nativestorytellers.com. Check it out. It's an amazing site. Mark has an amazing guest for us tonight. She's probably one of the most eclectically oriented ladies that I have ever heard about, and I'm very excited about it, so I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Mark, the show is yours.
Okay. I just want to check in with you, too. How's everything north of here?
Well, it's cold.
Okay.
It's cold in winter. What can one say?
Must be an East Coast thing. We'll find out how things are in the South as we progress through the show. But have you been, having a good week? It seems like you've been pretty busy with shows all week. Yeah,
we had Michelle Avanti on Monday. I had Craig Sim Webb on last night, and this coming Friday, Michelle is coming back again, and she and I are going to compare our predictions for the year, which should be a frightening and fascinating show.
Okay, well, hopefully it's not as scary as Victor's predictions.
It comes pretty close, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have to hide and watch to see what happens. But,
definitely a smart idea to have a drink in your hand as we get going.
Right. But, yes, might as well start working towards bringing our guest on. Yes, and right before the show, our guest posted that photo. So I'm not responsible for what happens during this show. And the Blog Talk English RoboBabe is going to think I'm a problem child. But we'll deal with that after the show ends. But anyhow, our guest is doing 2 shows within the same day. Maybe our listeners heard Susan Masino on Coast last night. She got some practice with George Norrie, and now she's ready for the big time on Nightlight.
Absolutely.
And we do kind of work together.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope everyone enjoyed celebrating Elvis's birthday yesterday, and we'll find out how Elvis fits into our guest story as the night progresses. Maybe we'll hear a little bit about Guy Lombardo too. But despite what other stations say, Nightlight ain't internet pollution. We're just nightlight. But we have a whole lot of Susan Masino to discuss her new book, Secrets of the Universe, and her 40 years of being an AC/DC insider and friends with the band. And we'll be covering a variety of other books on her books on AC/DC and Hank Williams and other rock stars. So, Susie, baby, get on in. How are you?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great. Hi, Barbara. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Our pleasure.
Yeah. I also want to thank you for acknowledging Barbara and me in the acknowledgement section of the Secrets of the Universe. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, and I'm very grateful for all the help, especially in the paranormal community, because there's so many very cool and interesting stories out there.
It's just an honor, like being right after George and Richard Sirrett, and there's our names. So we're getting credibility.
Yeah, we've made the big time.
As you should.
Yeah. So after being on Coast to Coast last night, can you afford the gasoline?
I don't know yet. I can't tell. I've tried to look, and Amazon's funny because if you sell a couple books, it looks like you sold a lot more. So I'm not getting too excited yet, but I'm hopeful. So
okay. That's good. Well, hopefully we can add to the sales starting in a couple hours, and people start going to Amazon after the show ends. But with what Barbara was saying last night about Craig Sim Webb being her guest last night, he discussed near-death experience he had. He's had almost a drowning experience, and it enhanced his perceptions. Barbara, is that the right word? It's kind of like the aftermath of.
Well, usually it's a sort of awakening.
Happened.
It's an awakening, I guess.
Okay, that might be a better phrase than what I used. But Susan, you had a similar awakening, but not as extreme. When you were younger, and maybe we can start there, and how that got you into thinking about the secrets of the universe.
Okay, well, my education in the paranormal started very early. When I was around 5 years old, I used to stay at my grandmother's house, and she would let me and my sisters sleep in a day bed in her bedroom, and we'd always say the Lord's Prayer, and then we would, she would talk and tell us some stories, and we'd go to sleep. And one night she told us this story about her mother who had passed away, several years before this, and she told us that one night she came to her in her bedroom and told her that she was going to be okay, and this was after her death. And I can't tell you how many nights I laid awake watching that doorway, waiting for, to see somebody come in that door. But it really got me questioning, like, how is that possible? I was so little, I thought, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Can she come and go as she pleased? And that just started a lifelong, discovery for me. Just I'm always curious, and I'm always reading more and more. There's always something to learn.
Okay, and you also had, debilitating migraines.
I did. Later on in life, I went through 14 years of chronic migraines, which was I don't even know how I survived that, but I've just been very lucky to make it through. When I was a kid, also before that, when I lived up north in Wisconsin for a while between the ages of like 4 and 5 and 8 years old, and that's when I had out-of-body experiences. I didn't know what they were. I would go to sleep at night, and as soon as I started falling asleep, the doors and the windows would become huge, and the ceiling would all of a sudden be 50 feet high, and I didn't know until years later that I was literally astral planing and didn't realize it. I didn't know what it was.
Okay. What do you think caused you to start having those kinds of experiences? Do you think it was like due to anything in the environment, or just that's just the way things like that happened? With you?
I was very curious after what my grandmother had told me, and then I've always been very I'm an empath, so I pick up people's energy and things. So I was always very, even as a kid, I didn't know this for sure, but I always felt like I didn't come from here, like I was kind of here to observe things. So, which is kind of funny because I ended up being a writer and, observing things and then writing about them. But that started for me, my grandmother saying when she saw her mother after her death, that was it. I wanted to okay, I've got to find out how that works.
So, does it still go on?
Oh, God, yes, absolutely. Where do you want to start, actually? I live in Savannah now, and I've done a lot of fun, investigations. Well, not all fun, but some of them were. Some sad, though, going to Gettysburg. That was very heavy. And if anybody wants to see real paranormal activity, go spend a night or two in Gettysburg. Guaranteed. It's crazy.
Do you, as we go more through your book, do you find like being empathic and having these insights is like a family trait, or you do have some interesting stories about your son, but what? Do you have it? It's just interesting. I was just wondering, where you think it comes from. Because I just never had an experience like that. I was just wondering if you have an explanation how what is it rooted in having these kind of perceptions.
Well, I think my early curiosity, of course, made me more attuned to everything, and I think also that being psychic kind of runs in the family. My daughter and my son are very, I wouldn't call them readers, but they're psychic. My mom and my sisters, we've always been able to kind of say, oh, this is what's going to happen, and it would happen. So I kind of grew up with that belief of like there was a knowing outside of the five senses, and then the more that I read about it, and and the funny thing too is that people on the other side, if they figure out that you can hear them or notice them at all, then they definitely like to try to talk to you, and that's an interesting thing. Sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's fine. It just depends on where you are. So I had a lot of activity, especially when we lived in Wisconsin, in the house in Wisconsin. We had lots of activity in our house.
Did you find you were on
what
a
kind
vortex?
of activity?
Did you find you were on a vortex of some sort?
Well, we kind of thought so in a way because we lived right off the Yahara River. we lived, my girlfriends, great psychics themselves, Tamara Gleason and Dawnette Cook, they used to tease me about my house was built on a burial ground because we had a big slope in the backyard and we found an arrowhead in the backyard one day. So could be that, that whole area, 200 years ago were all Native Americans along the river. So, the house might have been on a kind of a hot spot. And it definitely had a lot of activity. At times, just crazy stuff, especially when my son had his past life memories of being on the Titanic, which came about between 4 and 6 years old. And let's see, about quite a few years later, I want to say 13 years later, we ended up on the show, Ghost Inside My Child, that featured his story. And, when he was a little kid, of course, we bought everything for him, the books, the toys, the puzzles, anything that had anything to do with the Titanic, he owned it. So the TV show, when they came to film in 2013, they wanted us to collect all his drawings and all of his toys and everything, and we put them on display. But while we were doing that, while we were slowly collecting it from boxes and wherever we'd stored things, the activity in the house got really crazy. And my son had a computer station set up in the lower level of the house. It was pretty much his place to hang with his friends, and there's always kids over, and but there was a lot of activity, and he had set up his computer to record at night while we were upstairs asleep. And we started hearing, it was crazy because I'm upstairs and I'm in my bedroom with the door closed, and all of a sudden I'm hearing people talking. And I'm thinking, are there neighbors outside the door or outside the window? No, that's impossible. Nobody's out there. And it just kept ramping up. And pretty soon we were hearing doors opening and closing, people going up and down the stairs. One night somebody slammed, it sounded like somebody took a fist and slammed their fist down on the table. And they did that at 3 a.m. and then at 3:30 a.m. And then the same recording picks up somebody coming over to the microphone on the computer and tapping it with their finger. And we have that. We have a recording of that. So it was getting a little crazy. So one night when I was getting ready for bed, again, I heard something slam or something happen that made me jump, and it scared me. And I was like, okay, this has got to end. And I went downstairs. I turned on all the lights, got out my cross, and I said, okay, everybody. I said, I have a feeling that you people are from the Titanic. And I'm very sorry what happened to you, but if you have a bone to pick with my son, who could have been Thomas Andrews, who designed the ship, he died with you. He went down with the ship. He was given a choice to get on a lifeboat, and he refused. He left a wife and a daughter, and you need to move on and leave him alone. He died with you. Remember that. And after that night, the activity completely stopped.
Whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. But the noise, I mean, you could hear it audibly upstairs. It was that loud.
Date-wise, was it close to the date that the Titanic sank?
Oh, my goodness. Let me think. Well, come to think of it, it was just a month after because the Titanic sunk in April, and we shot almost, God, now that you mention it, we shot it almost a month after in May. So it was close to the anniversary as we were collecting the items. I never thought about that.
Activity usually starts.
Yeah, and it was just, I've never heard, we would hear things or somebody would see a shadow person or, we had those sporadic moments. But when we started collecting this stuff for the Titanic, I tell you, there's a party going on in my basement every night for about 2 weeks.
That's very cool.
And Susan, you also mentioned this in The Secrets of the Universe, the creepy painting of the man shoveling coal into the Titanic boiler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That. that one needs explained for the audience. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I found that one really one of those hair stand up on the back of your neck kind of.
Well, it's an amazing thing because we had gone through this episode with my son for 2 years, between 1998 and 2000, when he was 4 to 6 years old. Well, in the 2000, when he was 6, they brought the Titanic exhibit to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and my daughter called and said, I think, Jamie was only 6 at the time. She said, I think we should take him there and let him see the artifacts, and maybe that will bring some kind of closure to him. And, I thought, well, why not? He knows more about the Titanic than we do, so, I wasn't really worried about him being traumatized. I was more concerned with, how he was going to react to it. And so we went down there, and we went through the exhibit, and there were other children in the exhibit, and they were acting like normal kids, running around and doing stuff they weren't supposed to do. And my 6-year-old son is studying everything. If he would have had a magnifying glass, he would have used that, because he looked at every last item for minutes at a time, and he was completely transfixed. And so we get to the part of the exhibit where there's an actual boiler that they brought up from the floor of the ocean, and he used to cry over the guys in the boiler room died first. As soon as they hit the iceberg and the emergency doors closed, the men in the boiler room, they were trapped. And that's the first thing that he used to tell me. He used to say, it's stupid. It was stupid, Mama. It was a stupid mistake. They died first. They shouldn't have had to do that. He was very concerned with that. So when we saw the boiler, I'm like, oh boy, here we go, Yeah. And there was a boiler, and then there was mirrors on both sides, and there was a curtain and a spotlight on it and everything. And so when we're with a bunch of people, and so I look to the right, I see a wall of mirrors. I look to the left, I see a wall of mirrors, and I see a life-size oil painting of a man shoveling coal into a boiler. Now, I'm thinking to myself, wow, they really went out of their way to show what it must have been like, because these men had, heavy wool pants on, and he had a high-neck white shirt with the suspenders, and, and it made me feel like, my gosh, the suffering that they went through to do that kind of job. And so we got pushed, closer and closer to the left side where I saw this painting. And we get up to the painting, which is above me, because it was what I saw was a life-size painting, so it was a good 6-foot painting. I look up at the painting, and the guy turns and looks at me. The man in the painting looks at me. And when he moved his head, it scared me so badly that I closed my eyes like, oh, no, paintings don't move. And I opened my eyes, and there was no painting, and I was staring at myself in a mirror. And I leaned over to my daughter, and I said, did you just see? And she goes, a man? And I said, yep. And we described exactly what he looked like. And to my daughter, he looked like a guy who was standing in a place there was nowhere to stand. That's how she perceived him. My mind made him into an oil painting because that made sense. Uh-huh. But when he looked at us, he looked like we scared him, which was crazy insane. So,
how do you explain that there's at least 2 people who saw something? So it's not a mass hallucination.
Exactly.
It's just
yeah.
it's like all those people saw the the Phoenix Lights experience. It's not just a one-person experience. It's just intriguing to kind of ponder how multiple there could be multiple eyewitnesses to a unexplained phenomenon.
Well, yeah, especially when he looked at us like we scared him. That's what really got me, because I'm thinking, what did we look like to him? You know, was the ship already sinking, and maybe we were related to him, and he saw us as angels, or it really makes me wonder what he saw, because he certainly looked very shocked to see us. So, needless to say, we were more shocked. It was, first time I've ever seen a full-body apparition that moved and, pretty much acknowledged me and then vanished, like right in front of my eyes, gone. Yeah.
I just wonder if he saw you as, having that, I don't know, we call it like, the Victorian type, dress, evening wear, something like that. You would see, people elegantly dressed, doing a promenade around the decks of the Titanic.
Mhm.
It's like, looking across different timelines.
Mark, it was probably folding time.
Mhm.
And when you fold time, you have two generations looking at each other, or three or four.
Right. Yeah.
It was an interesting. I just thought it was a really captivating story in her book. I just don't have an explanation for it.
No, it's to me too. It's like, was that my son? Maybe he worked in the boiler room and wasn't a designer, but it just, he obviously saw us the same way we saw him. And I've never had anything like that happen to me before. I've seen shadow people before. I've seen lots of different things, orbs and stuff like that, but when you see somebody, in a painting turn and look at you, and then poof, they're gone. That's I waited my whole life to see something like that. So I'm very happy it happened, even though it was a very sad situation. But it did help my son, actually. After we went there, he go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to how did it help Jamie?
Well, he studied every little thing. He did not see the man since he was so much shorter in the crowd, and we didn't say anything to him about it. So he went home, and about a week later, it sounds a little dramatic, but he had night terrors. The 2 years that he was going through this, where he would go to bed, he'd fall asleep, and then all of a sudden you'd hear him bolt out of bed, and he'd come running out the door, and he'd be running. He'd go up and down the hallways, opening doors, closing doors, looking like he was trying to get out. And we'd have to, chase after him and make sure he didn't fall down the stairs. And so this went on for 2 years. And so we took him to the exhibit, and about a week after that, he was in his bedroom sleeping, and I was home alone. And all of a sudden I heard this banging on the bedroom wall. It just rhythmic, like bang, 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 bang. And I jumped up. I went down the hall. I opened the door. Here's my son, 6 years old. He's up on all fours. He's on his bed. He's staring at the floor, like in horror. And he is shaking so hard that the bed's hitting the wall. So to me, he looks like he's going to go into convulsions. And I came into the room, and I stopped when I realized, I started walking toward him. I realized he couldn't tell I was there. So he was staring at the floor, and he was shaking, just shaking uncontrollably. And before I could even move, this voice came out of him, and it wasn't his voice. It was a man's voice. And he screamed, "She's going down." And it just, oh my God, the hair on my arm stood up. I started to cry. I realized he was reliving the sinking of the ship. so all I could do is sit next to him and wait and, kind of rub his back, wait till he calmed down enough. And sure enough, after a while, he fell asleep. I covered him up. He went to bed. The next day, when he was up, I told him, I said, honey, you had such a scary nightmare last night. I said, you were shaking so hard the bed was hitting the wall. And he just looked at me like, I don't know anything. And he goes, well, Mama, the water was freezing. And I said, oh, yeah, you're right. The water was freezing. And that's all he said about it. And then little by little, he stopped talking about the Titanic, and about maybe a month later, he just didn't talk about it anymore. It was done. So, yeah, it was quite the 2 years. We couldn't really leave him with babysitters. We had to, because we had to warn people, if he gets up and he starts running, you make sure that he doesn't fall down the stairs or something, because that went on for a long time. And now he just looks back on it and says, Mom, I don't remember any of it anymore. And I'm like, well, I have you on film, so don't even go there. Yeah, he's been doing political things in school, and he says if he goes into politics, he's going to deny everything. So, which is going to make it hard because he's on TV talking about it, but that's okay.
Secrets of the Universe, you also bring up somewhat new area of research is with indigo children. Is do you think Jamie's heightened sense of empathy is somehow connected to him being an indigo child, or is there some kind of connection?
Oh yeah, I mean the whole generation of his, not all of the kids, but the kids that he hung out with. He's 25 now, and even back when they were younger, they were always working on projects and, trying to invent things, or, having computer game competitions and things like that. They didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't, sneak out late at night to go to parties. I thought they were all aliens, because I was not like that as a teenager. And
I'm not an indigo child either.
Yeah. So, but there's a whole, now there's a couple actually generations of kids that are indigo crystal children that are very intuitive. They're healers, they're artists. They have empathy it's amazing. And it's so exciting to see the new, what we have to look forward to in the next 20 years when these kids start really getting into, politics and how things are run. I think things are going to change a lot because they're very aware. Actually, my son was a mentor this year out in L.A. at Al Gore's Global Climate Summit. He's involved with that through school, and he also worked on a campaign for Lisa Ring, who ran for House of Representatives from Georgia. So he's, these kids are just they're all about taking care of the planet, being fair to each other, and I'm optimistic that they're gonna do things right, and I hope somebody steps in and does that soon.
Well, you do see what people like Mary Rodwell and others. Doing research on these characteristics that seem like they've missed the last several generations, and there's just been a sudden resurgence of these more humane traits, and it really is an interesting topic. Like, where did it just come from? Is it just some kind of childhood response to I don't know, like out of control capitalism kind of thing, that they just instinctively know that it's they don't want to be part of it. I get what you mean, because insights, yeah, they don't want to. My son would rather not have a car that takes gas. He'd like to see us go to other forms of fuel and stuff like that. And like I said, when I was his age, I wasn't thinking of any of that stuff. And they're very, very conscious of all of that, and it's exciting. And look at all the young people that we sent up to Capitol Hill this last election, 127 women, and a lot of them young and fresh and ready to, I think, do the right thing for once. I'm very hopeful, because we need some good leadership. That's all I'm going to say. Okay.
Better be careful there.
No, it's fine. The First Amendment applies to night light. But and you also had an interesting explanation, and it may go back to some of the literature found, even in the Middle Ages, but you do give an example of a soul retrieval.
Yes, which I didn't even know that's what it was. That was. I'm like you. I was like, okay, I'm not familiar with this term, but once it was explained, and I was like, okay, that is really interesting. So, can you explain Tamara's comment there? Yeah, absolutely. When I told Tamara Gleason about it, my friend that I do a lot of work with, she's a great psychic, as you know. You've had her and Dawnette on your show, and they're both wonderful. And I told her about this after we first met. We've known each other about 10 years now. But back in the early 90s, let me think. I had a newspaper that I put out every month called Rock Central. It was about rock and roll music, and pretty much every year on the anniversary of when I met the band, which was in August of '77, I would write a little piece about it, put a picture of Bon in it, and just kind of say, hey, happy anniversary to something that, the greatest day of my life as far as changing my life for the better. But after I printed that, I sent that to their publicity company, and their publicity company actually called me and said, Marvel Comics is going to call you because they're doing a comic on AC/DC, and they're having trouble finding pictures of Bon Scott. Now, this is, way before now you can find, a new picture of Bon Scott online almost every day. There's literally 100,000 pictures of Bon Scott now on the Internet, but back in the early 90s, there were not. And I was shocked by that. I had no idea that, they couldn't even find good pictures of him. So around that time, after he had passed, I had a dream about seeing him. It was a very sad dream for me, but I didn't know what it meant until I explained this to Tamara a good 10 years after it happened. But I dreamed one night that I was where Bon Scott had died. I was near the building where he was outside in the car. I knew I was where he had died. And I went to and I know it sounds really weird, but this is what I did, is I went downstairs to an underground apartment that didn't have any windows or lights. The only light that was coming in was when he opened the door, and Bon was living there. And I saw him. I gave him a big hug, and I said, Bon, what are you doing here? And I was very upset with him, like, you don't belong here. This isn't where you belong. You're coming with me. And that was kind of the gist of the dream. He's always been my guardian angel, and when Tamara heard that story, she said, you did a soul retrieval. No wonder he's your guardian angel. So who knows? I think maybe I helped him. I don't know, but that dream was very vivid and very sad. And then right after that, I believe 97, they came out with Bonfire, the box set dedicated to Bon Scott, and then his legacy just exploded. And, of course, now he's still, huge, bigger than he's ever been.
But, probably what, like Dante's Inferno might be something analogous to what you're saying, or, the harrowing of hell. Legend.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like I was literally in hell, but he was definitely in a very dark and like a dead end place where there's nowhere to go, is what I got when I saw him. And I grabbed him. I said, you are coming with me. You do not belong here. And if he died, which was reported, alcohol poisoning, you have to remember, too, that once a body passes away and your soul is free of the body, your soul is not necessarily free of the drugs or the alcohol you may have ingested right before you died. So a lot of ways I think that does affect, too, their perception of when they first cross over. That might, make it harder, I think, for them, because they're not in a clear state of mind at the time. But that's just my theory.
Yeah. I had one of the shows. I think we have book. It's one of the people we may be talking to soon. I have to go through all the calendars, but there is a guest who might be, giving our listeners some information on a subject like that. Just we'll have to keep.
Soul retrieval, Mark, is something that shamans do, and it's not necessarily that a soul is lost. It's more the soul has forgotten where it's supposed to be. And
right,
so
exactly.
It's not like a piece of your soul floats off into the ether. It's that you forget where you're supposed to be. And
exactly, yeah.
Hopefully, if we get this guest book, I don't have the book in front of me. I didn't know. But I am surrounded by a whole bunch of other books. But that idea does appear in quite a few other cultures. It's really an interesting topic, and I was just glad Susan and Tamara brought that up in the book. I was really intrigued by the subject.
Oh, yeah, and a funny thing, too, is that I've had prophetic dreams about AC/DC for the last 30 years. I've probably had at least 24 of them. And when I see any one of the band in my dream clearly, I write it down the next day, and it always manifests even if it's years ahead of time, which is crazy because 5 years before I saw them in Italy, I dreamed that I was in Italy seeing AC/DC at an outdoor concert. I'd never been to Europe. I didn't even have a passport when I was invited, and they paid to fly me over there. And the my friend of mine in Italy set this up, and I did a book signing, but it wasn't like I just went and bought a ticket and went and saw him in Italy. Somebody invited me, and I got paid to go over there, and 5 years after the dream, I was at an outdoor concert on a sunny day seeing AC/DC in Italy. So I have a very funny connection with those guys.
I'd like to have a dream like that too. So that'd be fun. And you also go into the numerology of the band. We can segue from the numerology into frequently asked questions as well. But you want to talk a little bit about all the numerology from the members of the band and what it all means to rock fans.
Well, it's I love numbers. I'm not an expert at numerology, but I certainly love to study it and play with numbers. And what you can do is take the name on your birth certificate, which people, that are married, they can do their birth certificate name, and then they can do the numbers for their married name, because when you change your name, you change the vibration of everything in your life, actually. And every letter correlates to a number. Like A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and there's only 9 numbers, 1 through 9. And then 10, you break that down to a 1, 11 is 2, 13 or 12 is 3, and so on. So what I did was I show you how to do that, and you can come up with, from your birth date and your name on your birth certificate, you can figure out your soul number, which is what you are now, your life lesson number, which is what you're here to learn, your outer personality number, which is how people see you, how they perceive you, and then your path of destiny, which is very interesting. And I had done Malcolm and Angus's numbers, and then I did Bon Scott's. And all 3 of them have the same number combination, only in different parts of their chart. But it shows you how they work together so easily, because they literally, when you look at their numbers, they were meant to work together. It really blew my mind when I figured it all out, because it fits so perfectly when you read about how it describes what Angus would be like, or Malcolm and Bon. It just described exactly what kind of lives they were going to lead and what their destiny was. And Bon's destiny and Angus's as well was they're a 9, which is a culmination of achievement, and they were meant to give their gifts to the world at all costs, which Bon went a little overboard with that. And that also comes up in his numbers of the key was moderation for him. And that, unfortunately, he didn't follow that. But numbers are very interesting. You can do numbers for a company's name or a band name or, your new married name or anything like that, or even a child that you want to have in the future and you've already chosen a name. Do the numbers. Make sure you're giving them good numbers.
There's a great book out there called Forever Numerology by Lynn Buss, and it's up on the internet, so you can actually, he's got a calculator in there, it'll do your numbers for you.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. There's so much on the internet that you can learn from, so much to read. It's just endless because, obviously with the Akashic Records, which is, the mind of God, if you will, everything is correlated to a number. Because if it wasn't, who could keep track? So it figures that numbers are very much more powerful than people give them credit for, I think.
That's true.
Okay. So speaking of numbers, we have to look at August 16th, 1977. And
yes.
that gives the audience a little more background on why you can be so accurate with saying that these numbers are accurate depictions of my friends. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened on this the day that Elvis died?
Right, exactly. And happy birthday to Elvis yesterday. He passed away on August 16th, 1977, and I was driving through Madison, where I lived at the time. I was trying to work for a local music paper. At the time, it was just print, radio, and TV. There was no internet, no cell phones, no 24-hour TV, none of that. So print was pretty big. And there was this little paper in town that wrote about bands, and that's what I wanted to do. I was all about that. And, of course, I was the only girl, so they weren't that interested in me or what I had to offer. And so that day I was driving along, and I was driving past the offices that they had in Madison, and this voice said to me, pull over and try to get an assignment. And I thought, yeah, right. They won't give me hardly anything, but whatever. And it just, this voice kept bugging me and saying, pull over and get an assignment. So I pulled over. I walked into the office. And I have to give a shout out to Gary Summers. He was my editor at the time. Now he's on Antique Roadshow. He does rock and roll memorabilia. And he was the editor at the time. And I walked in, and he had just hung the phone up, and he looked at me like, what do you want? And I said, hey, I'm just driving by. Thought maybe I'd stop and see if there's anything I could do for you guys. I mean, I'm wide open. And he says, well, I just got off the phone with Stardate, which is a big promoter in Milwaukee that did all the major shows. And he said, I just got off the phone with Stardate, and they got a band coming in downtown tonight, the Stone Hearth, and they need a gopher. There's no pay, but, you probably get a friend in for free. And I said, okay, yeah, what time do they need somebody? And he says, well, try to get down there about 4 o'clock. And I said, great, I'll do it. I'm on it. And I ran for the door, and just as I got to the door, I turned around and I said, well, what band is it? Do you know? Have you ever heard of them? And he goes, I don't think so. They're from Australia. They're called AC/DC. And I thought, okay, that's very weird. I'd never heard of them before. I'd never heard their music. Had no idea what I was getting into. And I went down to the club, and I met the road crew first, which was only 3 guys. They were driving around in a Ryder truck, the gear, and the band was traveling around in a station wagon. And they were broke, like broke, which is funny now when you think about it. And they played that night for $3 to get in front of about 75 people, including the bartenders. And needless to say, and I'd seen everybody. My thing was going to the Coliseum as a teenager in high school, and I saw everybody. I saw Fleetwood Mac, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Cream, everybody. When I saw AC/DC that night, they weren't even a minute into live wire, and the hair on my arms were standing straight up. And I backed away from the band because it was only about maybe 30 feet between me and the soundboard and the band. I backed all the way until I backed up to the wall behind me. And I had never heard anything like it before, and I'd never seen them. So I thought something was wrong with Angus because he wouldn't stop running, and then he was throwing himself down on the floor, And I'm thinking, is he sick? Is he okay? I had no idea what he was doing. And, of course, after they played, and this is 77, and they already, that night they played Live Wire, Problem Child, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, Whole Lot of Rosie, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. They had all these hits already, and nobody knew who they were. So the band played that night. I ended up becoming pen pals with the roadie, Barry Taylor, who was a dear friend of mine, and we kept in touch for the next 3 years, and I got to hang out with the band every time they came through the Midwest, Milwaukee, Chicago, Madison, Rockford, and I just, luckily kept in touch with them all these years. We've, stayed friends, and the funniest thing is the night that I met them, and I don't know why I even said this, but I told them that someday you guys are going to be as big as the Rolling Stones, which they thought was hilarious, really hilarious, to the point of Angus pulled his shoe off and stuck his foot in my face and said, does that mean I can buy me some new socks, someday? And I said, yeah, I think maybe you'll be able to buy some socks someday, Angus. Needless to say that he probably owns lots of socks now. But it was a running joke between us for 40 years. And they did become the only band in history to co-headline with the Stones at the SARS benefit in 2003. So they did become, but they would never take that compliment. The last time I got to talk to Malcolm, which was sad since he, became ill and was not well for several years before he passed, when I saw him on the Black Ice tour, the night that he was so good. They just started the tour, and Black Ice was, going up the charts, came out at number 1 in like 20 countries, and it was just so exciting, and I hadn't seen them for quite a while now because they hadn't been on tour for 7 years. And the first thing they did was they started talking about my book and everything, and I didn't know, what they had thought of it. And they said they liked it, but they weren't going to buy one. They wanted to sign copy from me, which was hilarious because Angus actually said, I could afford to go to the store and buy one. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you can. But I asked him that night. I said, now, do you think you're as big as the Rolling Stones? And Malcolm looked at Angus, and they both had a little grin on their face. And Malcolm says, I don't know. I can't say we did blow them off the stage at the SARS benefit. And they both kind of giggled. That was, they still wouldn't admit that, because they loved the Stones. That was their idols, and I didn't know that either. I didn't know that they idolized the Stones when I met them. I had no idea. So
you knew the band as they were first making it big in America. Bond's the front man for the band. How did when Brian was brought in? What impact did he make? Trying to fill such big shoes that Bond left.
Well, the story is very, I don't want to say complicated, but very interesting because Brian Johnson, his original band in northern England was named Geordie. And Bon Scott was in 3 bands. He was big bands. He was in the Valentines in the 60s, which was a pop band in Australia. Then he joined Fraternity, which was also an Australian band, kind of like The Band, or Grateful Dead, kind of a jam band. And that band traveled to England, and Bon Scott and Brian Johnson's bands played together, and they met each other. And Bon saw Brian perform. So, and this wasn't remembered when he died, but they did say that he said one time, he said, if you ever need to replace me, You need to get the guy in Geordie. Now, once he died, and this was years after he said this, I believe some fans sent them a cassette tape of Geordie and said, check this guy out. And they listened to him. Brian tells a story that when they first called him, they wouldn't tell him what band he was going to audition for. And I think when they finally said it was, AC/DC or something, he hung up on them because he thought they were pulling a prank on him. So he was kind of upset because he thought, this is a sick joke. Why would you call me, right after Bon Scott died? But they did. They called him back. He went down to London. He didn't know that he was supposed to go up into the jam room. He stayed downstairs and played pool at the Roadies. And I think it was Malcolm came downstairs saying, the bloke blew us off, and here he was playing pool with the Roadies and didn't know he was just supposed to go upstairs. And I do remember they jammed on some songs, and Malcolm said, which meant a lot, was he was the first person that made them smile after Bon's death. And Brian, I've known Brian for over 40 years, and I knew Bon for a little around 3 years before he passed. And Brian is so much like Bon, personality-wise, generosity, very humble, funny, constantly cracking jokes. He's so much like Bon that it was meant to be that he was to take his place. There could have been no one else that would have done it better, in my opinion.
Okay, and has Brian always worn his beanie?
Usually, yeah. Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's thinning a little bit on top there, but he usually has his hat on when he's on stage.
Okay. That does seem like a real synchronicity type story about Bon just pressed with Brian.
Well, and to add to that, Bon Scott saw Brian put his guitar player up on his shoulders, and that's where Bon got the idea to carry Angus around. So they're intertwined even more when you really look at it. Just amazing. It really amazes me. And Brian is just, he is so funny. Like Bon would be the guy that after the show he would party with the Roadies kind of guy, and that's the way Brian is. A lot of times he'll stay at the hotel with the Roadies because it's more fun than staying where the band stays. So he's okay. Very, he's a great guy. I mean, I love Brian, and he's so respectful of Bon because he was a big fan of Bon himself. And he was scared to death he said the first night he appeared with the band, his knees shook so bad he barely could walk up on stage. That's how scared he was. But he did pretty good.
Okay, and it seems very possible that you are mentioned in one of their songs.
Yeah. that goes back. That goes back to the album Powerage. Some call it Power Rage, some say Powerage, and it was the one that came out after Let There Be Rock and before Highway to Hell. And that was actually the last album that they did with George Young, their brother, and Harry Vanda. So Young and Vanda produced the first 6 albums, and that was the last one that they did. And I love that album because it's got Riff Raff, Rock and Roll Damnation, Down Payment Blues, Gone Shootin', tons of great songs. And it's oh God, yeah. I mean, it's got just, and I love the way. I mean, they did. It was Highway to Hell was brilliant, but it was different. Powerage is still kind of the raw live sound of AC/DC to me. it's one of my favorite albums because of that. And when I interviewed them at the end of '77, I did an article on them, and right after the holidays, they went to Australia, to Sydney, to record Powerage. And I was in touch on a weekly basis with Barry, so I sent them copies of my interview that I did with them, which was hilarious because most of the stuff they said to me I couldn't print. So, they gave me a really hard time trying to get any straight answers out of them. So I wrote a very comical take on the band, and I sent it to them, and I heard that they loved it. They thought it was really funny. But my friend Barry kept telling me that he helped Bon with some of the lyrics. And I was like, that's nice, and he told me that a couple times, and it just didn't occur to me to say, well, what did you help him with, or why do you keep telling me this? I just didn't really pay attention to it. And 30 years later, I'm, studying the band for the story of AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, and Bon used my name in Down Payment Blues. And he always called me Susie, and he loved to tease Barry about me. So he used to raspberry about him all the time, or about me all the time, even at meetings, which I heard from the manager, that they used to tease him about, oh, we got to get through Wisconsin, let's book a date in Wisconsin. We know we have to go through Wisconsin. So can't say for sure, but I kind of think, yes, that was what he was trying to tell me.
Okay, and people read your AC/DC frequently asked questions book. You have all kinds of behind the scenes information in there, like about the albums, the tours, the equipment they use. It's a excellent book about things that people want to know about the band. I learned it's like Burning Alive. It's like you said, that was really one of their very few political songs.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives just by reading that, it gives you takes you back 20 some years, and it's your explanation for what the song is about. Helps you to put into historical perspective what was going on at the time and what the song was about. So that was interesting, and it's like there was a fight between AC/DC's roadies and Deep Purple. It's just some interesting stuff as how the early days of the band, and it gives you. I just really enjoyed reading that book. Just like history, and we do have a rock history show coming up next month. But it is part of the history of pop culture that Barbara and I do cover, and it's just a terrific book.
Well, thank you. It's kind of a dictionary. It's funny because when I got to give Brian a copy in person after they played Wrigley Field the night in Chicago in 2015. And Brian took it, and he started, of course, he always looks through all the pictures. And he started looking through the book, and he goes, oh, so this is a dictionary on the band. And I said, pretty much, yeah. And he says, so there's going to be stuff in here about myself I don't know. And I said, maybe not. I'm not sure. So he was really funny about it because it is. It's like, 356 pages of all AC/DC.
Mm-hmm.
All facts and all crazy stuff. And there's plenty of crazy stuff.
Well, and you do include how MTV revived the importance of AC/DC's legacy.
Oh yeah, with Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
When Mike Judge came out with Beavis and Butthead, and believe it or not, the T-shirts that said they wore AC/DC and Metallica, they were supposed to wear Slayer and Metallica, and somebody decided that Slayer was not, known well enough, or too heavy maybe, so they switched it to AC/DC, and AC/DC had not come out with an album for several years. They had not done Razor's Edge yet. And this Beavis and Butthead just, opened them up to a whole new audience again of kids, watching MTV and going, hey, who are they? And it really helped. And then, of course, they came out and killed it with Razor's Edge, one of the best albums they've done, in my opinion. And the tour was amazing.
Yeah.
So they came back out on top, as they always do.
Yeah, and you also have a little bit of information in there about Bond learning to play the bagpipes.
Mm-hmm.
For it's a long way to the top. So it's the greatest rock song with bagpipes.
Exactly, and I was on the radio at the time that Korn did a song with bagpipes, and one of the guys at the radio station said, this is amazing. Nobody's ever done bagpipes on it, with a rock song. And I said, yeah, they did 30 years ago. AC/DC, it's a long way to the top. So, not new. Sorry, Korn stole it from them.
Okay, so since you are friends with the band, what is these little rumors that are circulating here and there about after this hiatus, they're kind of back in the studio doing something. Do you know anything about what's going on with the band?
Well, what I've seen, I can't say that I've been told anything official, but there was pictures taken earlier in 2018, of Angus up at Bryan Adams' Warehouse Studios in Vancouver, where they've done their last 2 albums, I believe, maybe 3. And they also had pictures of Phil Rudd, Stevie Young, who, filled in for Malcolm, and Brian Johnson. So I think they're working on a new album. I can't say that for sure, and I can't say for sure if they're going to tour, but I'm certainly praying for it. Because I think Angus wants to keep rocking. I hope he does.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I hope so too.
It's been pretty quiet right now, but they're good about that.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. It's like, see, the post showing up on Facebook, but who knows if it's true or not? But you would know more than I do, so I just thought I'd just ask. Hopefully, some of the listeners will be trying to find out more as well, and hopefully we will get some kind of announcement soon.
Oh yeah, no, I predict that if they do a new album and a tour, they're going to break records everywhere. They're going to break ticket sale records. They're going to break album sale records. They're going to just be on top all over again. And I would love to see that happen for Angus now that Malcolm is gone and, you know, all of his brothers have passed. He's the only brother left. And, you know, the people closest to him and Malcolm were Brian and Cliff and Phil. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed.
Since you did mention George, we really should discuss the role of like the older brother. He was in a band that had a really big hit as well. So, what was George's influence on his younger brothers?
Oh my God! Without George Young, there would never be an AC/DC, because George hit it big in the band Easy Beats in Australia. They were called the Australian Beatles at one time. They were so popular. And their song, Friday on My Mind, is now the national song for Australia. And
is it really?
That's so cool. And he and his friend, let me think now, he went up to England for a while and got together with Harry Vanda. That's when they started producing together. And when he was in England and his little brothers were still in Australia, he would send them albums of music that they couldn't get down there. So that was the beginning of their education. And then one time Angus told me that they came home from school and, one day George was just George, and the next day George was like part of the Beatles. And they came home and there were girls trying to climb over the fence to get in the yard to get to George. And he said that's the day Malcolm and I decided what we were going to do for our life. As soon as they saw the girls trying to climb in the windows. They're like, okay, we're good. And so when Malcolm started AC/DC, George, like I said, he produced the first 6 albums, he and Harry Vanda. He would play bass when they didn't have a bass player. They went through a lot of bass players and drummers in the beginning, so many that it was almost like a puzzle to put together how many people they went through. But sometimes when they didn't have a drummer or a bass player, George would fill in. So he helped them write songs, he produced them, and he even sat in when they needed him to. But he was there, he was a huge influence on how they produce their music. And because Malcolm, they're one of the few bands that go in and play live in the studio and record it that way, and then they put on the vocals and the guitar lead after. How
did they come up with their name?
Oh my gosh! Well, it's 2 different stories, and I'm going to stick with the sewing machine. One says sewing machine, one says it was on the back of a vacuum cleaner. But Margaret, the only sister out of 8 kids, there's 7 boys and 1 sister, oldest Margaret Young, who used to make Angus's schoolboy outfits after he started deciding to wear that on stage. And they saw the AC/DC on the back of the sewing machine. And they thought, that's super cool, alternating and direct current. That's electricity. That's power. And so they named the band AC/DC. And then one night they were going to a club somewhere, and the cab driver said to Malcolm, he says, oh, so you guys swing both ways, huh? He almost punched the guy out. Malcolm was like, what, do you want to get punched? Because they had no idea that it meant that. So later on, they would ask the band, and especially Bon, they would say, are you AC or DC? And Bon said, I'm neither. I'm the lightning flash in the middle.
and,
always funny.
You just mentioned that Bon was the front man since he was a singer, Angus is kind of the face for the band, but it's actually Malcolm was really the leader of the band.
Right. Yes, he was the boss. Even though he didn't come off that way, he rarely did interviews. Usually Angus and Bon or Angus and Brian do interviews. Malcolm has done a few, but he didn't normally do interviews, and very soft-spoken, but, if things don't go the way they're supposed to. I put a chapter, and I thought it was funny. I put a chapter in the FAQ book called Who Packed the Biggest Punch in ACDC, and every fight that I found in the over 30 years of history that people where somebody was punched, the puncher was always Malcolm. So I gave him that credit for being packing the biggest punch in the band. Because he tangled with a few people over the years. But you'd never know that if you met him. He was so nice and so quiet and, seemed shy almost. But he ran the band and wrote all the biggest riffs, riffs to Thunderstruck, Back in Black. I mean, he was, and very well-deserved, called the Riff Master for a reason.
Okay. So, let's see, Barbara. Do you have any questions? You want to get into? We still have 35 minutes or so left. Do you want to talk about your Hank Williams book? You cover what 3-4 generations of country music legends.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just wanted make sure we touch on that so we can include the country music fans who are tuned into us as well.
Oh yeah, and I grew up in venues, which meant jukeboxes. And I discovered Hank Williams on the jukebox and through my grandmother, who loved him. So I grew up on his music. I loved his music. And a friend of mine, his name is Mickey, God bless him, gave me the idea to write a book about Hank III. I didn't even know Hank III existed, which is the grandson, Hank Jr.'s son. So he said he's never had a book written about him, and he's very interesting. You should get a hold of him. I got a hold of him, and he agreed to interview, which was amazing. And the book ended up, it's called Family Tradition, 3 Generations of Hank Williams, and it starts out with Hank Sr., goes through Hank Jr., and ends with Hank III's life. And I got to do a book signing at the Hall of Fame in Nashville, which was a huge honor. And just very proud. I think that's one of my best work is Family Tradition.
Okay. What was the family's secret of being such a country music legend? I mean, it's like Hank Williams, Johnny Cash. It's like you just have those few people that are always mentioned as being the cornerstone inspiration for so many country artists. What was so special about Hank Sr.?
Oh my gosh, he started as a kid. Okay, he learned how to play guitar. And he wrote and sang songs from a very young age. He was very prolific as a writer. And he grew up playing in, a band that his mother used to, drive him around and book the gigs and take the money at the door. And then he got a radio show when they were down in, I want to say, when they lived in Montgomery. Alabama. I could be wrong about that because they lived in a couple different places. So don't be upset if I've got that wrong. But he started very young, and in his lifetime, he recorded 170 songs and died at the age of 29. And the thing that upsets me is that, yes, he had a drinking problem. He was a binge drinker. He would drink for days and then not drink for a long time and then fall off the wagon and binge drink again. But when he recorded, he never drank in the studio ever. And how do you write 170 songs or record that many songs and die at 29? A lot of like the movie that they did recently called I Saw the Light, it was upsetting to me because Hank, there was way more to Hank than just his drinking. He was a genius. He was an absolute genius at writing lyrics. He was what everybody else, Johnny Cash and all the rest, Waylon, they all walk in Hank's footsteps because he was there first. And my favorite story about Hank, and he was nice to everybody. He was sweet to everybody. He gave money to people all the time. When he started making money and he would see somebody down and out, he'd hand them a wad of cash. He did it all the time. And he was just a great person, and he was funny, and he was very comical. He gave everybody nicknames, and he used to make jokes all the time. And I'd love to see a project done that shows what he was really like. And he wasn't just only a drinker that fought with his wife and then ended up dead. There was so much more to him.
And how did his influence? We know what Hank Jr. Really hit the big time with the Monday Night Football theme song. But how did his dad's influence propel Hank Jr. to such a celebrity status?
Well, I have to give Audrey Williams the credit for that, even though she started him out. When Hank Sr. died, Hank Jr. was only 3 years old. Mm-hmm. So as he got older, Audrey, his mother, pushed him into singing his father's songs. And so he went on tour singing his father's songs. And he got, I think, up to the age of 18 when he fired his mother and decided to record, he wanted to do Southern rock, and he's definitely, one of the founders of the sound of Southern rock, and he wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to do more rock and roll. So the funny thing about the three generations is that Hank Sr.'s father was hospitalized most of his life, so he grew up without a dad. Hank Jr.'s father, Hank Sr., died when he was 3, so he grew up without a dad. And then Hank III, Hank Jr.'s son, the grandson, his parents divorced when he was 3, and he grew up without a father also. So none of them grew up with their fathers in their lives, which is sad, but an amazing repetitive cycle that which is broken now because Hank III has a son, and he's close to his son, as the last I've heard anyway, and we talked about that, about breaking the cycle of his family, of father never being there, because they all three had that. They all three grew up without their dads. So very sad. I mean, incredible talent, an incredible family, but a lot of tragedy and a lot of sadness. Just an amazing, Hank Williams. And, I was going to say, too, one of my favorite stories about Hank, when you think all these, badass like Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash and all that, Hank was way ahead of those guys. He showed up one night And he was drinking. He was not doing well. This was after his divorce from Audrey, and he really was kind of lost. And he came to this gig, and he didn't want to play. And he got up on stage, and he walked up on the stage with his guitar, and he grabbed the microphone, and he says, hey, y'all. Bet you all drove a long way here to come and see old Hank, didn't you? And the crowd just roared. He set his guitar down on the floor and said, well, you seen him. He turned around and walked off the back of the stage and got in the car and left. And I'm like, okay, that's where it started. That's where the badass started, right there. And I just got such a kick out of that because that was rare for him to do something like that. He was drinking at the time and he wasn't very healthy. He should never have been on the trip when he died on the trip trying to go to the 2 gigs to play New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. He really should have been in a hospital. So
it is like the exhaustion of the tour and combined with the alcohol, is that what caused his death?
Well, what happened with him, which is, again, he had a hard life, and he was born with spina bifida, which left a hole in his spine, which gave him a lot of trouble with back pain. The first song that he wrote when he was in middle school is called Backache Blues. And as he got older and he toured, and remember, they toured in these old cars, right? They didn't have luxurious buses and all these things. So he's bumping, getting bounced around in a car every night. And he also fell later on. He fell off a horse, I think they were hunting or something. And he fell off the horse, and it hurt his back even worse. And the real downfall was, I believe, at the end of 51, he had back surgery, which did not help him at all. It made it worse, and he ended up with a doctor who wasn't a real doctor, which, exactly kind of what Michael Jackson did. This guy gave him chloral hydrate when he was in pain. And chloral hydrate is, they call it the Mickey Finn drug back in the day because that was the original roofie. You could knock somebody out with it. It was a very powerful sedative. And you definitely don't mix it with alcohol. And he was so desperate, he had been fired from the Opry because he had, started missing gigs. And they fired him, which, sent him further down the spiral of, being depressed. And he insisted on trying to do these 2 shows, even though he should have really been in the hospital, taking care of his back and him being on chloral hydrate. So they're shooting him up with morphine and giving him chloral hydrate. And on the ride that he died in the back seat that night, he died of a massive heart attack. And it wasn't from drinking, but, of course, the mixing the drinking and the chloral hydrate and everything they think he might have had a heart attack a week or 2 before that, too, where he completely collapsed. And they got him back up again, but, in those days, everybody's like, yeah, I'm sure he's fine, he's okay. And then a few weeks later, he was gone.
A second one. Okay. And that was just all by the age of 29.
Right, yeah. I thought he was in his 40s when he died by how he looked. I didn't know until I started researching him that he was only 29. It's a very old soul, for sure. So prophetic. I mean, oh my goodness. He knew that he wasn't going to live. He even, when he said goodbye to his cousin that he took off for the gigs, he said, this is probably going to be my last Christmas. And he was very psychic in his own way. And it's, one of the greatest songwriters, in my opinion, in American history, music history, is Hank Williams. And he was, 50 years later, awarded a posthumous Pulitzer Prize for his lyrics. They awarded it to him in 2010.
What is the title of your Hank Williams family book?
Yeah, it's Family Tradition, 3 Generations of Hank Williams.
Oh, okay.
And you can find that on Amazon.
Okay, and I think it is interesting to study patterns of creativity, and that does come up every once in a while on a show. And it's just I don't know a whole lot about country music, but you are presenting a interesting portrait of a very influential American music family.
Oh yeah, one of the greatest.
Mhm. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and you also mentioned there, the Williams family's influence on Southern rock, and is a nice segue into your recent tour of the Big House. How to talk about that museum. That's maybe at some point I can make it down to, or is it in Macon to? Yeah,
Macon, Georgia, the Big House, the Allman Brothers Big House and Museum. You've got to go. It is so cool. If you were a fan, anybody out there that loved the Allman Brothers, it is so worth the trip. Macon is an amazing city. I had no idea, and I should have known this. I felt kind of embarrassed, actually, to think that not only the Allman Brothers came from there, well, they moved there from Jacksonville in '69, but they were based out of Macon. So was Otis Redding, so was Little Richard, so many different people that did songs, with Duane Allman before he passed, and, Leonard Skinner got their start out of Macon, and I had no idea that there's such a history, but of course, the Allman Brothers put Macon, Georgia on the map. And when you go to the Big House, it was a house they lived in for 3 years, and it's just amazing. They have Barry Oakley and Duane Allman's bedrooms recreated from when they lived there. And they both, for people that don't know, Duane Allman passed a year after the band really hit it big in 1970. He was killed in a motorcycle accident after visiting the bass player. And then a year almost to the day, the bass player died on the same stretch of road in a motorcycle accident. So they're buried together in Macon, and when you go to the house, it's only $15 to get in, and you can spend all day there. And they have everything, all their equipment, their clothes, just everything. And the greatest story that I came out of there with was the guy that worked in the gift shop. He gave us a tour of the cemetery, which is like 1.5 miles wide, so I'm really happy that he knew where to go. And they used to hang out at night, the Allman Brothers, and write songs in that cemetery, okay? So a lot of their songs are actually written about real people. Like Little Martha is about a little girl that, is in that cemetery, and Elizabeth Reed, that's another woman that was real, that they wrote about. And so I found out from the gift shop guy that they have a cleaning crew that comes in, like once a week to clean. And the father, the family that does this was up in the jam room. They have like a, where they used to sit on the floor, cushions on the floor with a round coffee table and stereo system, and, just so 60s and 70s. And so he was up there cleaning one night, and this was after Greg Allman passed. And somebody tapped him on his shoulder. He turned around, and Greg Allman was standing there looking at him. So my goal is to investigate and be able to stay overnight in that house, because I bet you can hear music at night. I can swear to God that I bet you they're jamming, because, a lot of them are on the other side now, and why not be in the Big House? That's where they were happiest. So it was really fun. I want to go back because Greg Allman had just passed, and they didn't have his monument done yet. So I want to go back when they have that done, and see the big house again. I just loved it. I mean, Cher. When Cher is married to Greg, they have the Cher and Greg pool table. They have pictures of her with him in the room, and they have everything. They have lots of letters that Duane Allman wrote from home when they were on tour, and Duane Allman, for guitar players, he was one of the most incredible guitar players ever, and died right when the Allman Brothers became famous, right before they did. So he's been gone for a long time, but yet is cited as many guitar players, idols. That they look up to Duane's playing.
Yeah, and obviously Eric Clapton is one of them, and it's like every once in a while you still have Eric playing with the Allman Brothers. Mm-hmm. Or not recently, but they have done some. It was like maybe some of the Beacon their Beacon shows.
Oh yeah.
But the Derek and the Dominoes short-lived band had a lot of roots almost 50 years later. So. Mm-hmm. Is there stuff about the Layla album at the Big House?
There might have been, but I didn't really see that. Okay. They have so much stuff though. I tried to look at everything, but there's so much there. It's amazing.
Do they? Have some of the displays, with Dickie Betts. Was he living at that house as well?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They have a sign where he sat in the window and wrote "Ramblin' Man." So they have like stuff like that all over the house. Like this is where, Greg wrote this. And so, yeah, Dickie Betts wrote Ramblin' Man, I think, in the front room there. And they have a little sign. So just amazing. Such great music. Oh, my God. When I discovered the Allman Brothers in high school, I went completely buku crazy for Southern rock. So it was, I've been wanting to go to Macon forever. And I'm glad I finally got to go, and I can't wait to go back and do more research. There's so much there.
Well, I hope they do let you stay at the house. Just come back and update us on what you hear.
Oh yeah, yeah. And what was really cool, and again, a great synchronicity is that Rex, the gift shop person, took us to Greg's grave, which like I said, it would have been hard to find on our own because I had no idea the cemetery was so big. And Chank Middleton was there. I met him, and he was Greg Allman's best friend from the year they met in 1969 up until he passed. So I got to meet his very best friend. And we were talking about how, Barry and Duane's, where they're buried is all white marble or white granite, and they're going to do black granite for Greg and do kind of a different thing next to them and put a gate around it and everything. And Chank was saying that, they've decided that it should say Midnight Rider on it. And I said, well, yeah, and there better be a silver dollar. And his eyes just lit up, and he went, oh, my God, I got to call his wife, because Shannon, his widow, sorry. But he got so excited. He goes, oh, God, I've got to call Shannon. She's going to love that. So I'm hoping to go back and see it, and there will be a silver dollar in the black granite, because there should be. I just think that would be right.
Right. Right. So, it is, and what Greg and Dickie's boys are working together, and they have their own band, and they're on the road as well. So that's nice to see.
Oh yeah.
Just like Hank Jr. and his son carrying on the legacies. We have the Almonds, or people from the Almonds, still working together. 50 years since the band formed, so you get the next generation carrying on, from their dads. So it's nice to see that.
Oh yeah, I always love to see that. It's it's great. I mean, they leave behind this incredible music, but then so many of them have like George Harrison's son, and Sean and Julian Lennon, and the next generation are some amazing musicians in their in their own right, and it's always great to see the legacy live on.
I guess we could, you just mentioned Sean Lennon. Sean is mentioned in your the Secrets of the Universe. Might as well remind people of that. What do we say, like a synchronicity type event or precognition, whatever category it falls under. But you had a meeting with Yoko and Sean.
Yeah, and very unexpected too, because we always wanted to meet Yoko when we lived in New York. We'd go up to the Dakota and walk around and think, wow, wouldn't it be cool to run into her at some point? And one night in February, where it was warm out, it was toward the end of February, and we went up to eat at a restaurant on the Upper West Side right down the street from the Dakota. That was our favorite place to eat, spaghetti. And I got out on the street, and as soon as I stepped down on the corner, we were supposed to go to the right, and I took a left and crossed the street. And my husband was following me, and he's like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm not hungry yet. I just feel like I got to walk a little bit. He's like, God, I'm starving, really? And I said, just walk a little bit. So I walked about a half a block, and right in the middle of the street, which, I don't recommend people doing this in New York, but I crossed the street in the middle of the street. And again, my husband's following me going, what are you doing? And I said, I'm done. Let's go. I'm ready. Let's go eat. So I crossed the street. We're going back down toward the restaurant. And I go past, it was the 80s, okay, 1984, I want to say. And everything was, punk and neon colors and safety pins and, that sort of look. And there was this row of dolls in the window, and they were done up like little punks, and they had, streaked hair, and they had safety pins. And I stopped, and I started to laugh at the dolls. I said, oh, my God, look at these dolls. Aren't they cute? And, of course, my husband was ready to kill me by that point because he wanted to go eat. And I looked up at the couple in front of me, and it was a taller gentleman and a very petite lady with dark hair, wraparound sunglasses, and she had her hair in a ponytail. And I looked at him, and I recognized him from a previous time that we were at the Dakota. He was a boyfriend of Yoko's. And I recognized him, and then I looked at her and realized, oh, my God, Yoko Ono is standing right in front of me. So I backed away from her, and I went to the other side of my husband, to the left of him. I grabbed his arm and tried to whisper to him who we were standing next to. And before I got a chance to say anything, she had a cane that she was using, so I don't know if she had twisted her ankle or something. But right when I was going to tell him who she was, she turned around to walk away, stepped down, and stumbled, and my husband instinctively jumped and caught her and set her back up. And when he looked at her and she looked at him, she giggled and said, well, oh, I'm sorry. She goes, thank you. And I could see I was watching him because he didn't know who she was at first, and I did. And the look on his face was just priceless. So she stood there, and I didn't want to say anything to her because I didn't want everybody else to notice she was out without bodyguards. So we just kind of, watched her walk away. And then later on, we moved away from New York, and I insisted on I'm taking a letter to the Dakota to tell her who we were, to thank her for, stopping and giving us an opportunity to speak. And so I just wrote her a letter, and I took it to the Dakota. And as we're walking down to the Dakota, there's a little kid out in the street with two big guys, one on either side, and they're trying to hail a cab. And I looked over at the kid, and the kid turns around and looks right at me and smiles at me like he knows me. And I look over at my husband, and I said, that's Sean Lennon. And he looked over, and sure enough, it was Sean Lennon with two bodyguards. And he just smiled at me like he just knew me. And I smiled back, and then I went in and I handed the guard the letter. And that Christmas, we moved back in June, and that Christmas she sent us a card from Yoko.
Wow.
So, amazing. I can imagine she hasn't stumbled and been caught by many people. So I'm sure she remembered it. But we were so stunned, I was speechless. I didn't know what to say to her. It was too surreal.
That's an interesting story, and she has her role in pop culture, and she's also doing her performing arts during the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus performance, doing the bag things. She's an innovative concept artist. So your stories are have been very intriguing, and we have several minutes left, but maybe do a quick Robin Zander story, and then you can plug all your books, and I just think the audience got a nice look at all this history that you've been a part of.
Yeah, I was in the right place at the right time when I started writing, and I was there. My first book, Rock and Roll Fantasy, includes stories about everybody: AC/DC, Van Halen, Kiss, Cheap Trick, Ted Nugent, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I used to work for Cheap Trick back in the day. I ran their fan club because their manager at the time, Ken Anamani, lived in Madison. So I used to run their fan club before computers, which was horrifying, but we won't get into that. But you can go to Amazon to find all my books. My website is SusanMasino.com. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Not so much on Instagram yet. I just don't have time to take on another platform. But, Robin Zander's story, I don't, there's a bunch of those, so I don't know exactly which one you want to hear about.
Well, he's what's he like in person? Just another, like Brian Johnson, just a humble guy?
Yeah, Robin is very sweet, very, my God, we go back I met Cheap Trick before I met AC/DC, so we go back even farther. And, he's an incredible singer. I mean, I think Robin Zander's got one of the best voices in rock, period. He can scream, he can do ballads, so I love Robin. And he's always fun to see and to talk to. And he lives down in Clearwater and does things with Brian Johnson and Cliff Williams. So, because AC/DC, actually, Cheap Trick is the only band that AC/DC ever let come out and play encores with them. So they were very close as bands. They loved each other.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they were Bon Scott and Tom Peterson. Oh, dear. Those two, they were definitely having a good time. And Kirk Dyer, who is now passed, God bless him, he was their tour manager for 14 years and told the funniest story of when they were played with, I think it was Monsters of Rock with Scorpions and everybody. And the next day they were all on the plane ready to go and no Bon, and the plane is starting to roll off to the tarmac, and here's Bon running across the tarmac with a bottle of Jack in one hand and no shoes. And he got on the plane. He had the bottle of Jack, but he forgot his shoes. So they had a lot of fun together.
Okay, and Cheap Trick is still touring?
Oh, yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. They're still out there. So is Journey, so is AC/DC, Van Halen, a little bit. I think Kiss is doing a farewell tour, which, we all take that with a grain of salt because it seems like everybody does a farewell tour and then there's a tour after that. So let's hope they just keep, I want everybody to just keep rocking till they drop. That's
okay.
My thing. I mean, if Keith Richards can do it, anybody can do it.
Right.
And he just turned 75 the other day.
Yeah, and you get Jimmy Page turning 75 today too. So, and a lot of birthdays, over the last couple weeks. But we're down to about 2 minutes, and so people can find you on Amazon, Susan Masino, Masino. So has this rock life caused you to have to see a psychiatrist?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Has this life caused you to have to see a psychiatrist?
At times, yes.
Like on family vacations.
Yeah, definitely, yes. No, my daughter is a psychologist, and she's always analyzing me. So, and she's right about everything. So that's very hard to take. She'll get the archive. Yeah, she's amazing. She blows my mind all the time, and but yeah, she loves to analyze me. I'm probably a pretty good subject because I'm all over the map. So,
hey, Mark, it's time to say goodnight.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Susan. This was just a terrific discussion, and thanks, Barbara, for producing this. And we will see everyone, I think, next Tuesday with Mike Bastine and Mason Winfield. We're going to talk about the